everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Parra. I'm the Executive Director of All in Education. Very excited to have you all with us this afternoon for our episode of Advocates in Action. Advocates in Action is a forum that we created at All In to have conversations about the issues that are impacting our community and what we can do collectively as problem solvers to bring solutions to the education system that will benefit our students, our families, and educators that serve them. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm very excited to have Liz Salazar from Unidos US and Jeff Cetino, our Research and Policy Director at All In, with us. I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves and give you all a little bit of background on them. So Liz, you want to share your background with folks?
Yeah, thanks Stephanie, and thanks everybody from All in Education for including me and Unidos US in this conversation. So I'm an Arizona Policy Advisor for Unidos US. I live here in Phoenix. I was born and raised in the far West Valley. And Unidos US, formerly known as National Council for La Raza, is the nation's largest Latino advocacy organization. So I'm very excited that we have some boots on the ground here, lifting up the needs of Arizonans, and specifically in this instance, the students that we have in our education system. I've been working in policy for a little bit, and I came from the education space, and I was formerly a teacher. I've taught in the United States, and I taught in Nicaragua, and I taught in Spain as well. So I had an interesting introduction into the education space, and it really opened my eyes as to some of the things that we could learn from other countries, and some of the realities of being an educator in the United States that are unique to the way that we address education. So again, thanks for having me here today. I'm very excited for the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here, Liz. And I did not, I don't think that I realized that you had taught in other countries. So that's really cool. A little tidbit to hear today. So thank you for joining us. Excited to have you here this afternoon. And I'll turn it over. Jeff, do you want to give a little background on yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone, Jeff Cetino, Director of Policy and Research for All in Education. And in all transparency, I'm not an international teacher. So Liz, you take that crown. So I'm recovering from being born and raised in LA. Don't hold it against me, but I have been here since 2004. And I think my background is, I was lucky enough to be born in Los Angeles, but my mom and my mom was from Mexico City. My dad was from El Salvador. They met here, they had me, but my mom had 3 daughters from a previous marriage. And I saw them go through the experience of being an immigrant or undocumented within the States, and what they had to traverse to get an education. And I think that my awakening around education and the importance of education and the makeup of our communities, I boiled it down to a bus ride that I took when I was a junior in high school. Me and my friends were ditching from class, and we wanted to go to the beach. So we took a bus in Bell, California, which is 10 minutes away from East Los Angeles. And we took that bus all the way down to the beach that was next to Orange County, Santa Monica. And from every single bus stop, you see the community changing, right? From primarily or predominantly Latino, 99.9% Latino in our high school, changing color every single bus stop, and to a point where it was predominantly white, affluent area with BMWs and surfboards. And it just kind of dawned on me how we're separated from geography, but also we're from social class, and how that impacts our education. Extremely felt when I actually made it to college, and I saw that my preparation wasn't the same as the peers around me. So education being, our best opportunity, to live the life that we want to live, and so important to really protect that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that context and background, Jeff. I think it's really important. One thing that we really pride ourselves at All in Education, our team, we're all first generation college students. We all come from very similar backgrounds and experiences. A lot of us as first generation Americans as well. I'm also the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants from Sonora, we say. I was born and raised in Yuma on the southern border. And my experience was also one that, like, growing up in Yuma, I never felt like a minority, right? Like a quote minority. We were always a very dominant culture down there, and continue to be. I think right now, Latino students in Yuma County are like 88% across the board for the high school district, much like here in Phoenix Union, where 82% of our student population is Latino. So you don't feel like a quote minority until you start, changing your geography, to Jeff's point. And so one thing that we are committed to is making sure that every single student, regardless of the zip code that you grow up in, or the neighborhood, or the block that you're from, that you have access to just as many resources, just as much support, and just as much opportunity in the education system that is, the education system and the school that's just down the street from you. So excited to, with that context in mind, very excited to dig into this conversation with you both. When I joined All in Education, April 1, 2020, I keep saying that, because it was a crazy time to start a new organization. 2 weeks after pandemic was really hitting Arizona. But it really was an opportune time, because we came into this work wanting to talk about the inequities in the education system. And so pandemic really pulled the veil back, if you will, on the education inequities that many of us here have been advocating against and in support of our community for a really long time. We almost had it like served on a silver platter. Like, this is what we've been telling you, that, families are one crisis away from economic devastation. Our kids need access to technology and computers and Wi-Fi. And so the pandemic really proved to a lot of people to showcase all of the gaps in opportunity in the education system. So for some quick context, Jeff, do you want to share with folks just, we did that 4.5-week outreach campaign, just key highlights of what we learned from those conversations?
Yeah, for sure. One of the values that All in Ed has is, being in contact and as close as possible with the community. So as we saw the COVID-19 pandemic really starting to flare up within Arizona, instinctually, one of the first things that we did was go back to the community, right, and see what the community is saying about their experience with COVID-19. So we did that survey, and we got 5 main points that we heard from that campaign. And the first one was that there was a severe lack of communication from school systems in both English and Spanish formats to our families. There was a lack of access to technology in the form of devices and reliable internet. Parents were not supported and were ill prepared for at-home learning. Fourth, families faced employment and financial challenges. And then fifth, families were concerned about special education, English language learners, and other at-risk populations falling further behind. And I think as time traversed, like, we all really understood that, but at the time that we did the survey, like, a lot of these points were super salient and of the time.
Yeah, and that really has led now to, we are here a year later. One of the things we saw, the Department of Education released the data from last year's test scores. And one thing that we saw very clear in that data is that there are communities, everyone was impacted academically by the pandemic, but there were communities that were disproportionately impacted. Latinos, English learners, students with special needs and abilities. So they were further impacted by the pandemic. Liz, could you talk a little bit about, why that is? And ultimately, if you can share a little bit about what Unidos released a report recently surveying Latino parents. What did you guys learn from those surveys that you did nationally? And then, how does this tie to what we are seeing in the actual academic data?
Yeah. Well, like you said before, this experience of the past couple of years has laid bare inequities that were already there. it also laid bare some realities about our education system writ large, regardless of who the student and family is. And one of the things that's important, I think, to take away from this is to note how important the system is and how it weaves into our community, right? As soon as things got bad, parents realized, oh, when my school isn't functioning the way it usually does, everything falls apart in my house, slowly but surely, or very fast, for a number of reasons, right? Like my internet's not good, or I don't have internet. My kid's not getting fed. I don't know what to do because I have to go to work, a number of things, right? And when you think about the inequities that were already there with students that you mentioned, students of color, disability, let's talk about rural students too, it's going to compound all of those greatly. And it's going to, any sort of like thread that was keeping it together broke. So we definitely saw that stress come down on those families. And we did a poll at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was more about the economic issues with families. However, as you know, a classroom is an ecosystem, and learning doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everything that happens inside and outside that classroom affects the student. And we saw that over 40% of families that we had polled, Latino families, had lost at least one job, and many had lost multiple streams of income. And that continues to be an issue in the polling that we recently did, where 70% of families, they continue to be worried about their family's health, even more so than they were a year ago. And 1 in 5 of our families need rental assistance. And so, there's all these stats, but I look at it, when you're thinking about education, looking at a classroom. So if you have a classroom of 30 kids and 1 in 5 of those has housing instability, a quarter of those lost a loved one to COVID, half of them had a family member with COVID, right? And then you start to look at students and the breakdown and how this affects learning in the classroom, how it affects what the teacher is doing and experiencing, and it quickly becomes an untenable situation. And students and teachers all over the country are sort of yelling in crisis because we have some real social emotional issues happening as well, which I'm sure we're going to get into. So when you talk about the structural elements that are already inequitable and adding a crisis onto that, and then adding the subsequent social emotional issues and the health issues, et cetera, it starts to get pretty bleak, and it starts to point to the fact that because we didn't focus on solving these issues before we were in a crisis, we're in some hot water now, even more than we were before in Arizona, which we've been struggling for more than a decade. So I think what we need to take away from this as advocates is like, we have to draw a line in the sand and no more playing softball with legislators, with elected officials, with anybody about what we need to lift everyone up. And if we talk about lifting everyone up, that means really lifting up the half of our kids that are Latino. We have all these goals and stuff. It's mathematically impossible to reach them if we don't lift up Latino kids.
Yeah. And Liz, you brought it up, but I'd love to, dig in a little bit further here, because I know we are seeing this not just in Arizona, but across the country. You mentioned the social emotional issues that are happening in real time in our classrooms. The U.S. Department of Education released a report just a few weeks ago on the mental health crisis that's happening in schools across the country. And I feel like you hit a nail on the head here, because it's not just the trauma, the real trauma that families and kids have experienced, but that trauma coming into the classroom as well. And how there's this idea of almost secondary trauma on educators, right? And they're already have so much on their plates, and they're juggling, and then we're just going to drop this in the middle of their classroom. So can you unpack that a little bit more with us? Like, what are you guys hearing? What are you seeing that's happening either here in Arizona or in other parts of the country?
Yeah, that secondary trauma that you talk about is real. And teachers, educators, paraprofessionals, everyone that works at a school, they are humans too, who also experience this pandemic. and maybe lost a loved one or have long COVID or any number of things, right? And then when you have a student come into your classroom who maybe is acting out, they're hitting people, throwing chairs, defiant, whatever it is, then the teacher is also taking that on. Maybe they feel threatened for their physical safety. Maybe they feel threatened that their job is in trouble. I mean, any number of things, right? And so then they're taking on the trauma of their students, which teachers tend to do anyways. If you talk to any teacher, they call them their kids. They don't view them as really something outside of themselves. It's part of the fabric of who they are. And so it really weighs down on those educators. And it's hard to express just how much we ask them to do until you go into a classroom and sort of experience for yourself at least a little bit of what it's like to be an educator now. It's not the way it was when you and I were in school. It's not the way it was 50 years ago, right? It is completely different. We ask them to be so much more than just information givers, right? Or teachers or what have you. That's actually only a small portion of what they do now. It's so much more those wraparound things that they're doing in their classroom to help things run smoothly. And so when you're already running on fumes, when all things are okay, add in the secondary trauma, add in the stress of COVID-19, and it becomes another untenable situation. And we're seeing this, like you said, all over the country. I just read an article about this teacher in Baltimore who gave an interview anonymously about how bad it is in their public schools and how it feels like it's an uphill battle and they're not going to win and they're going to continue to bleed teachers. Yeah. And, we bleed teachers here. By the time you reach your third year, like 40-something% of teachers quit. And then you talk about, we've got a pipeline problem and a retirement cliff coming that probably is coming a little earlier now because of COVID. And we've got overcrowded classrooms, right? We don't have the right teachers in the right subjects. It's not to be doom and gloom, but it's another situation where we have to act now. No more softball. We've got to do something to protect our educators because ultimately they are the ones in front of our kids, spending hours a day with them and helping them to learn. So they have to be protected as well.
Yeah. And you really said it. And, I think when I think about making student-centered decisions, both as an education advocate, but also as a school board member, I always kind of picture it like a target, right? Like if the student is at the core, at the center of our decisions, their teachers are around them, and then our classified employees, our education support professionals are wrapped around them, as well as our administrators. And everyone this year, from folks that I have heard from in real time here on the ground, it is difficult. It is a very different year. It was almost like 2020 was like the hardest year, and then 2021 said, hold my beer, right? Like it just that's what I keep hearing. Like 2021, this return to in-person, balancing, COVID mitigation with quarantines and everything. Like the pandemic is still very much alive and well. Like it's still here, right? So they're navigating all of these things, and certainly it's been a challenging year. But so let's talk a little bit. We at All in Education want to be solution oriented as well. So one thing that we're really excited about, because we do have a lot of concern, like you mentioned, Liz, about this retention issue. And if at the pace that we are going, we're not going to have teachers left or education support professionals left if we keep bleeding them, if we keep squeezing them dry. So what are we doing? One, to support them in real time, but also like we believe that family involvement has to be a part of this, right? So our work at Parent Educator Academy is absolutely critical in that we see it both as a way to get families more involved and engaged in the education of their kids, but also like a potential pipeline. So Jeff, do you want to talk more? I know you've engaged with our parents and Parent Educator Academy. Can you share more with folks about PEA, what we're doing, and then, you know, what opportunities you see coming out of that?
Definitely. So the Parent Educator Academy recruits parents from across our state, and we're really teaching them, or the curriculum is focused on building a bridge from the parent and into the school setting, right? Demystifying the school setting so that parents get involved with their children's education and become their first teachers at home. Like the survey that we did a couple of years ago said that parents really needed to be better prepared to be that teacher at home. And that Parent Educator Academy really is uplifting those skills. Unintended or slightly intended consequence that we've experienced is really the blossoming of these parents. With a little bit of investment into this education academy, we've seen parents really grow in their own social and emotional skills and their own social capital, developing their own networks within these cohorts, speaking up when we bring in other speakers from other walks of life, and really being just, I would say the word that I'm looking for is like we lit a fire in their experience with educating their kid and getting close to that school setting. It's been really inspirational to see moms understand the importance of third grade reading, understand the importance of eighth grade math, really become aware of the importance of college, and not only the importance of college, but the steps it takes to actually get into college. So we've seen that this small investment into really engaging parents is paying off dividends, not only for parent engagement, but for community empowerment.
Yeah, you know, I'm super excited as well with just some of the outcomes that we saw. So in spring of 2021, we had a small cohort. It was really, you know, like a test pilot. We had an initial cohort of 30. We, over the course of the spring semester of this year, had 27 parents who graduated and completed the program, 90% participation and completion, which is great for a parent program. A handful of our parents are now interested in pursuing careers in education, and one mom is actually a full-time employee now at her kid's high school. So we see a lot of promise and potential to also be a potential pipeline of talent for the education profession. This year, this fall, our fall cohort, we had over 400 applications and interest forms in the program. Our fall cohort has over 100 parents in it. We're super excited about being able to scale this program. We're hoping to serve another 100 parents in the spring and continue to scale the program out, and the way that we're delivering it with our partners at TNTP. We really feel like given investment, additional investment and resources from our philanthropic partners, our state partners, and local system partners, that we can truly get this to be an evidence-based model for engagement and meaningful, really meaningful parent and family involvement and engagement, but also a potential grow your own model. So that's some of the work that we're doing with PEA. We're super pumped about it, and we'll continue to engage in that work. I also want, oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, if I could jump in just really quickly with some of like the additional learnings. Yeah, just learning that this investment in parents it pays off in a number of ways, right? Community engagement, but also community empowerment in the sense that we all see the communities around us, and getting our parents engaged with the school system will later pay dividends in getting engaged with all kinds of other systems that our community needs, this Latino representation, right? Another thing that we learned is that our facilitators are Hispanic, Spanish speaking, and a lot of school systems have struggled in the past in engaging parents, but our 90% attendance rate is unheard of. Me having a history in the nonprofit sector, a 90% attendance rate is a golden unicorn. So super proud of that. And to your point, Liz, there's so many things that are being asked of the teacher, like being that center of becoming the center of social services within your community. We, through our other leadership development programs like Adelante and Listo, we have young Latino leaders from multiple different community sectors coming together and saying, what can we do to improve education? And I think that collective approach to understanding what communities need, because if we don't have a healthy and prosperous community, we're never going to have a healthy learning environment within the school.
Awesome. And I just want to give a quick shout out. It looks like we have a PEA parent watching. Delia commented in the chat. She said, I've definitely felt more empowered to speak up and be the advocate my children need. And that's really, I mean, that in and of itself is a testimonial. Our parents are learning how to get involved, how to speak up for their kids, how to become a part of the process. And ultimately, like, if your child is an English learner, if your child has a special need, we know that they even more need advocates in their parents and need involvement from their parents to really make sure that their kids get the resources and the supports that they need from the education system. So thank you, Delia, for being with us. Excited to have you here. Yeah, so let's keep moving on. So, you know, another thing that we, to give some context here, All in Education and in partnership with Unidos and some Unidos affiliates, we submitted a letter to both Superintendent Hoffman and Governor Ducey. We did get responses from both offices, very excited to collaborate and talk to them and brainstorm on solutions, because again, we want to be partners. We want to be solution oriented for our kids and our families here in Arizona. So excited to keep those conversations going, but let's talk about some of these solutions that we want to discuss, right? So PEA is one. Another one that, you know, we as a state don't right now on our state report cards, we don't track for family involvement. And so we want to really get to a place where we are tracking and monitoring how families are involved in the education process. And so that was one of the recommendations in the letter as well. Another one, we're really going to have to address the impact of unfinished learning on student outcomes. So Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about what you think we should be doing? What are the kinds of investments that we need to be making to address the impact of unfinished learning?
Yeah, thanks. This is a big one, right? I think this is probably the issue, other than social emotional issues, that gets the most airtime from news, from everyone, is the idea of unfinished learning. And how we're going to, quote, get our kids to catch up. And, you know, there's a lot of debate about what that means and what the most important use of our resources is right now. But I think what we need to realize is there is already this huge gap, right, of student outcomes for Latino students compared to the state at large. And then when you look at like the white subset of students, then that gap gets even larger. And that was before the pandemic. So now we're going to see those gaps widen as we continue to see data roll in, unless we do something quickly. And I think something that we suggested, and that seems to be a part of the investment strategy, is looking at how summer time can be used to help this, help sort of catch kids up. But I don't like to put it in that way, like catching them up, like they're going to get to some invisible line and all of a sudden it's okay. I think it's more complicated than that. It's getting them back into this mindset of learning, because right now, you know, we're all experiencing this weird reality where it feels like the world is sort of like going crazy around us, and then we log into our work email, and, you know, and for kids, it's walking into the school and trying to learn Pythagoras theorem, but at the same time thinking, you know, they're one of those 1 in 5 families who doesn't have housing stability, right? So I think focusing on after school time, focusing on summertime, or we can really hone in on what needs to happen, right? Is there a reading issue or literacy issue, numeracy issue, comprehension, English language learning, what have you? And I think the the heartening thing is that we do see interest in that investment, and we are seeing actual investment from the state into sort of extracurricular or outside of regular classroom learning opportunities. I think another component of this is going to be, with educators and them talking amongst each other and with pedagogy experts about how do we change the way that we deliver information in this new age. And although it's really like doing things virtually is not that new, I think a lot of people were just forced into it in the last couple of years. So I think some parents are now seeing, like, I like a mixed mode, or I want my kid to be completely virtual, or, trying to figure out like how kids thrive, how students thrive. And since we have these resources at our disposal, how do we leverage them to make sure that we can reach every kid, right? Our education system is modeled on a really old way of teaching and producing people that then produce things. But really, we need people who can have ideas, critical thinking, problem solving, the biggest problems that we've ever seen in the world, like global warming. Some third graders going to be responsible for helping to solve that right now. So we need to think about, let's take a look at reimagining how we engage students, how we engage parents, like you said. I love to see the success of the Parent Educator Academy, and hopefully, it can be used as a model for other programs around the country. Yeah. Yes, I love that. That's the goal. One thing I also wanted to hit on too with unfinished learning is making sure that, schools really think about expanded learning opportunities, learning time, in the school day, and then targeted intensive tutoring, and also making sure that our kids are getting that additional instruction and accelerated learning opportunity from a certified professional that is the most effective. But we have seen with our parents too, once you give them the tools, our parents are showing that they're learning, that they're reading with their kids at home, they're doing math work at home. So like, really to the point you just said, Liz, like, let's leverage our parents as partners in the process, right? And empower them to help and support their kids by giving them the tools to do it. And so we're excited about PEA, also because I think it could also be a way to help with addressing the impact of unfinished learning. So I wanted to jump to, we've kind of danced around this topic, and I know it's going to be a big priority for All in Education. But this idea, and Liz, you said it in your opening, right, that there are factors outside of the classroom that ultimately impact attainment. We're at All in Ed calling them the social determinants of education. Jeff, if you can help us unpack that with your background in health. But Vitalist Health Foundation did a lot of work around social determinants of health. And so, Jeff, do you want to introduce this concept of social determinants of health, and now how we're thinking about a similar kind of frame of mind for education?
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So in 2000, the World Health Organization came out with this concept of the social determinants of health, right? So health doesn't happen only in the doctor space, but it happens in communities, especially in relation to international support. They were really looking at other countries and how they could develop their social determinant of health infrastructure within that country. That concept then being applied to the United States, and seeing that some communities were just more unhealthy than other communities. So what are the social determinants of health here at home? And then Vitalist Health did some amazing work about 5 years ago, and continues to do amazing work with really pushing this framework around health, calling it the social determinants of health. So where we live, learn, work, and play, all have impact on our health, right? So health doesn't just happen whenever you go visit a doctor and get some medicine, but it happens when you wake up, the choices you make when you go, eat breakfast, where you work, when you come back home, and the access to exercise that you have and the access to healthy foods that are around you, right? We've all heard of food deserts and a lot of impoverished communities living in the middle of a food desert. But also the privilege of having a membership at a local gym, right? Some people can't afford that. So how do we build communities that make access to jogging in a safe manner accessible to everybody that wants that? So these social determinants of health impact not only your health, but life outcomes. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation did a study here in Arizona, and they found that there was about 14 years loss of life from South Phoenix to Scottsdale. So within a 20-minute drive in a freeway, you'll experience the loss of 14 years of life because of the makeup of these communities, right? No one individual lifestyle, but the accumulation of all the stressors of crime, of food deserts, of all of these things that a community is not being able to grow a healthy individual. So in the same logic, the social determinants of education is how are our communities building a nest that's gonna successfully nurture learners that are ready to learn. And it goes into what you were saying, Liz, about the teacher and the school system being at the center of social services, which unfortunately has become a reality because our families have nowhere else to go, right? If they go to the school setting asking for social services, it means that they've gone everywhere else and haven't been able to find a connection to those services. So unfortunately, it's just an indicator of the stressors that our families are living under. And just to bring kind of like a little bit of data into it, so the AZ merit scores came out a couple of months ago, and for our reading numbers, 26% of Latino students within our Arizona education system are reading at a proficient level compared to 52% of our white students. And the same thing for math. Only 18% of our students are scoring at a proficient level in math compared to 46% of white students. So just to co-sign what you were saying, Liz, we've developed a bifurcated education system where Latinos don't have access to quality education, along with the increased communal or community-based stressors that they got to live with, right? And then our white students are overperforming the Arizona baseline. So white students are getting a different educational experience than our Latino students are. And what does that mean? It means that we really have to pay attention to, ameliorating some of those community-based stressors where we live, learn, work, and play, including policing, housing, access to healthcare, access to quality food, so that our students go into that education setting ready to learn. And it's going to take, like everyone within those different community sectors coming together and backing each other up, right? Whenever there's a healthcare referendum, education sectors being able to support that. And whenever there's an educational, piece of legislation, having those other community sectors back us up because, I have fuerza and there's power in numbers. And I think if we take that collective approach to really understanding community and its influence in education, we'll all be better served.
I think you said something interesting there about, when there's like a healthcare referendum, the education people should care and vice versa, right? And all of us have been part of these conversations for a long time about education funding and education advocacy and da, 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 da. And you know that behind the scenes, the people who say they care, it's actually a very diverse set of people from very different places. You've got philanthropy, you've got business, you've got community volunteers. There's all sorts of people who are working a lot behind the scenes, and they all have a sort of a different agenda. And they all care about education outcomes because at the end of the day, education outcomes affect everything, right? They affect crime statistics, they affect our taxes, they affect our workforce, right? All of these things that, when I talk to people about why education is important, there's the you can appeal to sort of the moral part of like everybody deserves access to education, or some people you have to appeal to the sort of like hard numbers economic part of it. And so both of these things can coexist, but we really do need to work together, get rid of the partisan stuff, get rid of xenophobia and racism as being part of the picture, and just say, this is good for everybody if we all work together on a number of things to make Arizona better.
Mm-hmm.
And just to bring it kind of home collectively, because I feel like you both highlighted some really good points here. I think the way, you know, we certainly as education advocates are in our education ecosystem. But I think what we're asking our folks to do is to really look at ourselves as a much larger ecosystem, a much larger community, and how all of the different sectors interact and interplay with one another. And I mean, if pandemic didn't show us that, I don't know what did, right? Because we already knew before the pandemic that for a lot of us serving in Title I schools, a lot of us serving low-income communities, I can tell you personally, as a board member, voting to close schools was the hardest vote I have had to take in my board service, because I know how much our community relies on our schools. We are asked to be social service agencies, and we're not given the tools to do it effectively. So we do what we can, right? We provide in Phoenix Union wraparound support services, social workers, counselors, food service. And, you know, our employees were sending out meal boxes. We're running COVID vaccination sites right now and testing sites. Like, we are asked to do so much. And I think what we are wanting advocates in the community to do is to start really framing and thinking about, if we want to be a vibrant, a resilient community, a thriving Arizona, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a very diverse coalition from educators, from healthcare professionals, from business leaders, philanthropy, government leaders coming together and saying, we're going to focus and we're going to put our energy into helping ensure that every single student has access to opportunity and justice in the education system. And in particular, to the point that was made here, if we're going to close those gaps on, I believe we want to get to 60% college attainment as part of our state progress meter goals. We want to close gaps in attainment in 3rd grade reading and 8th grade math. Mathematically, we have to focus on Latino students because we are such a large segment of the population, 46% right now in our K12 student population. But if you look at demographic trends, Phoenix Union, I feel like I say this like a robot, like I keep saying this, but I think it's such an important statistic for people to hear. We are 10 years ahead of the city of Phoenix and 20 years ahead of the state of Arizona. Our demographics are 90% students of color, 82% Latino. Right now in Phoenix Union, nearly 80%, 77% of our families qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So, you know, if in 10 years, the city of Phoenix is almost 80% low income, and if in 20 years, the state of Arizona is almost 80% low income, that is an economic crisis if we've ever seen one. And so I feel a real sense of urgency for us to really start making these targeted investments, strategic approaches to closing these gaps in opportunity, because our kids are the future. Our kids are the future workforce, our families. You know, there's so much talent and potential in our community. We need our leaders to see our community as talent and potential. And so that's what we're doing with our work in Parent Educator Academy, Adelante, and Listo, is really preparing our parents to be a part of the education process, but also preparing our young leaders and veteran leaders in the education system to really start making data-driven decisions in their communities that will get outcomes for our kids. So with that, any final thoughts that you guys want to share with folks? I don't see any questions in the chat. So any final words of wisdom, things that you want advocates out there to walk away with?
I think for me, something that's always important to talk about when we talk about these gaps in outcomes for our kids, there is nothing about Latino kids, nothing about English language learners, nothing about rural kids or any of the other demographic subsets of kids that struggle that is inherently opposed or challenged by academic rigor, right? And we have to make sure that, you know, that's always a part of the conversation, because Arizona has a problem with racism and xenophobia, right? And there's nothing about our kids that makes them bad learners. And it's important for the parents to know this too. There is a whole system of things in place that make it a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. So even if they're not acutely aware of all those things going on, like you guys have mentioned, when you get outside of your community's bubble and maybe you went to college, or maybe you just went to another high school because you were on the track meet or something on the track team, and you see this school looks a lot different than mine, or you learn in a class in college. I didn't learn until college that Japanese internment camps existed in the United States. And that's when I was like, oh, what I got as education was not the same as the kid that went to Gilbert or the kid that went to Chandler. And that's when I got mad, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think our parents need to start to understand that too. And that's part of the advocacy, is that there are cards stacked against your kid that we hurdles that you need to be aware of, so you can advocate, because you know that the student, the teacher, the parents, in this case in Gilbert and Chandler, are at the school board meeting, are raising a fuss about this, that, and the other. And we have to raise a fuss too. Our kids are worth it. And in order to move this state forward, this country forward, Latinos have to be central in the conversation about justice and advocacy.
Absolutely.
Well said, Liz. And if I could just co-sign what you were saying, now and even before, I think we all understand that education is the foundation to our communities, to our state, to our nation, and we have to protect it, right? And we all understand that early education pays dividends in reducing the number of people that get incarcerated, increasing the number of people that graduate and go to college, increasing high paying jobs, and increasing our tax base for our nation, right? So it's central to so many different things. And I trust that our elected leaders are smart enough to understand that, but they're also savvy enough to understand that they don't encompass a 14 or 20-year term. They're only in office for 4 years at a time, right? Some even less. So that's the mindset that a lot of our leaders have, and we have to elect people that enter those positions that are already values aligned. And the only way that we elect people that are values aligned is that if we identify people that are values aligned, that are thinking about running, or maybe never even thought about running, and get them to get engaged into the political process. Not to say to make things political, but just to kind of step up into leadership. And what we advocate for is making sure that Latinos have an opportunity to step into some of those seats, because we live it. Our lived experience is part and parcel to growing up in these communities, not becoming a statistic and not forgetting where we came from. And that's the type of leadership that we're advocating for. And if I could just take a little bit of time to like talk about a little vignette that I saw that I think is that shares insight into like a more macro view of how communities and schools could work together. In Phoenix, there was a lot of money invested into affordable housing and housing families that were homeless. So they took an apartment complex, they gave out grants to house previously homeless families, and these families moved into this city-owned complex, and now these families started going to the neighboring elementary school. So the elementary school started seeing a lot of social emotional problems, some behaviors, attendance issues, et cetera, et cetera. The apartment complex and the school started working together and developing kind of like attendance trains and attendance phone trees to calling neighbors, calling other neighbors to, like, you know, get their kids to school, having an attendance coach walk the kids from the apartment complex to the school. And then that evolved into an after school space where kids were going in and getting extra support in math and reading, which then became the school being able to identify the top 10% of chronically absent children and using apartment complex members to identify those children, and then being able to share grades and kids that needed a little bit extra support with that after school program. So we see a meshing and a democratization of the educational setting from the school bleeding into where you live, and from where you live bleeding into the school. And I think that it's going to take that type of, you know, systems thinking and collaborative approach to really make apartment complexes, or where you live or where you work, or even when you go to the doctor, become part of that educational experience, whether using YouTube or that Khan University or anything that comes to mind, making learning a 24-hour of the day process and not just 8 hours of the day when, you know, or 6 hours a day when our kids go into school. But yeah, right there with you, Liz, and let's inspire people like the parents from our Educator Academy to look for those offices of authority.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of this really important conversation. This was really thoughtful and informative, and I hope that those of you that joined us, that joined this conversation, took something away from the conversation. You know, my last kind of ask here is that we really, it's really going to take all of us coming together around solutions, around ideas, to create, to problem solve, and to really transform the education system. Liz, you said it, you know, we have a system that, you know, hasn't changed that much, hasn't evolved that much. And so how are we going to push ourselves as leaders and advocates and educators, practitioners, to support our students, support families, close the gaps in opportunity that exist, so that every child has access to opportunity and justice in the education system. I also want to make sure that you all know that, you know, we've said it. I think it's pretty loud and clear. We believe that our community's perspective and lived experience is important, is critical. So if you are a leader of an education organization, an advocacy group, if you are a policymaker watching this, please be thoughtful about how you engage our community. Please listen to our community, include them in your stakeholder conversations, because our perspective matters, our lived experience matters, and we always want to make decisions that are rooted in listening first and listening to understand our community first. If you need support with that, I think both of our organizations would be happy to collaborate and partner with anyone who needs help doing that. And then last but not least, our policy agenda is now public. So you can visit alllineducation.org/policy, download a copy of our policy agenda. All of our priorities, our research and policy priorities are there. I want to thank the 40+ members of our All In for Equity task force. Liz, you were part of that, who helped us build this agenda. It was also informed by our parents who told us about the needs that they have. So please feel free to download a copy of that policy agenda. And then finally, please save the date, January 27th. We will be publishing our second MAPA report. MAPA is the State of Arizona Latino Education, Power, and Influence. We will be doing a live in-person event at the Phoenix Zoo on January 27th. So save the date. Keep an eye out for the MAPA report to drop. We're very excited to have the second iteration of MAPA. So thank you guys for joining us. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.